incoming missile trajectory.
Stop your engines! Prepare to be boarded! Mayday! We are losing stabilization!
600 ships are stuck. Billions of dollars are being lost every single day. And the most powerful navy in the world still can't fix it. Because the problem isn't what's happening above the water, it's what's hidden below it. This is what happens to the world when the Strait of Hormuz closes. Day by day, for 90 days. At first, everyone assumed it was the missiles. Iranian drones hitting tankers. Ships on fire near Oman. 21 confirmed attacks in the first weeks alone. Shipping firms pulled out overnight. Lloyd's of London went quiet. When insurance disappears, captains don't move. One captain shut down his engines and waited. He didn't know what else to do. The US Navy moved in. Britain, France, warships. Everyone assumed once the navies arrived, it would be over. But they were wrong, and no one could explain why. Remember one word: mines. By the end of this, that word will mean something very different to you.
This wasn't a naval battle. This wasn't a blockade you can negotiate away. This was something far older,
far cheaper, and far harder to stop.
A naval mine costs a few $1,000s. A supertanker costs hundreds of millions. You don't need to sink the ship. You just need to make the insurance. Impossible. And the ship never moves. Iran deployed mines across the strait. And then, Iran lost track of them. The New York Times reported it. US officials confirmed it. The country that laid them cannot tell you where all of them are. The Washington Post. Mine clearing could take 6 months. 6 months. We are already past day 50. Most people would say the mines are the biggest danger. But the real threat might be something else entirely. What do you think it is? Drop it in the comments. By day 10, the world realized this was not a temporary shutdown. To understand why it didn't end in days, you have to see what trapped the strait in the first place. Not one problem, several, stacking on top of each other. First, the geography, 33 kilometers wide, at its narrowest point. 2 shipping lanes, one in, one out. There is no other route out of the Gulf. Saudi Arabia, UAE, Kuwait, Iraq, Qatar. All of them have one door. And right now, that door is mined. And even if you understand the geography, the next problem is worse. Clearing it. Why clearing takes so long? A minesweeper moves at 5 knots, slower than a bicycle. It has to. Because one mistake is the last mistake. The strait is 167 kilometers long. The mines are scattered. The maps are incomplete. And Iran was still laying new ones. On April 23rd, Trump ordered the US Navy to shoot any Iranian boat caught placing mines. Not warn, not intercept. Shoot. And even if you cleared a path, ships still wouldn't move, because the next problem wasn't in the water, it was on paper. Before the crisis, war risk insurance for one Hormuz transit, 0.125% of the ship's value. After February 28th, 0.4%. For one large tanker, that's a $250,000 increase per trip. Most captains didn't wait to do the math. They just turned around. And even if ships wanted to move, they had nowhere to go. Iran blocking ships from leaving the Gulf. America blocking ships from reaching Iranian ports. And 20% of the world's oil caught between 2 navies. going nowhere. On April 17th, Iran's foreign minister announced the Strait of Hormuz was open. Oil prices dropped 11% in minutes. Headlines declared the crisis was ending. For a moment, it looked like the world could breathe again. Then something happened. Trump said the U.S. blockade would remain. Iran canceled the reopening. And on April 18th, Iran closed the strait again. The strait that opened closed again within hours. And the world realized this wasn't ending anytime soon. By day 20, the damage had moved from ships to ordinary people.
For people far from the war, this isn't politics. It's survival.
What started in the water was now showing up everywhere else. The Gulf first. 70% of Gulf food comes through Hormuz. Saudi Arabia exports the world's oil, but it imports most of its food. UAE, Qatar, Kuwait. Nations sitting beside the oil, running low on groceries. India. 60% of India's cooking gas comes through this strait. In Mumbai, restaurants began closing in early March. Not bombed, not flooded. Closed because there was no gas to cook with. Long queues at LPG stations, people switching to kerosene, to firewood. In 2026, the Philippines. On March 24th, the Philippines declared a national energy emergency, the first country in the world to do so. They had enough oil supply until June 30th. That's it. Europe. The European Central Bank warned of stagflation. Germany. Italy. Recession risk by end of 2026. Shell warned Europe could face fuel shortages by April. Britain's Asda supermarket. Fuel stations already running short. And in some cities, far from the strait, the pressure was already showing. In Islamabad, diplomatic talks under heavy security brought the city to a near standstill. Schools, markets, roads. Not because the war reached there, but because the system around them was already starting to feel the strain. But here's the story almost no one is covering. Hormuz isn't just about fuel for your car. It's about the bread on your table. 46% of the world's urea fertilizer comes from Gulf nations, through Hormuz. Urea goes into wheat, into corn, into rice. Planting season in the northern hemisphere is happening right now. If fertilizer doesn't arrive this month, the harvest fails in autumn. The food shortage arrives in winter, not because of drought, not because of floods, because of 33 kilometers of mined water. By day 30, the crisis had spread beyond the strait. Oil prices rising, supply chains breaking. And the problem was no longer contained. By early March, Brent crude had surged past $120 a barrel. The IEA made it official. The largest energy supply disruption in the history of the global oil market. OPEC tried to compensate, pledged more output, but their own oil was trapped behind the same blockade. Iraq was hit worst. 90% of its state budget. Oil. 90% of its food and medicine. Hormuz. Iraq wasn't losing income, it was losing everything simultaneously. The attacks expanded. A drone struck a tanker, 800 kilometers from the strait, near Kuwait. The conflict wasn't staying in 33 kilometers anymore. It was spreading. By day 60, the world stopped waiting and started preparing. Governments releasing reserves, rationing plans being discussed quietly. The minesweepers were still working. Diplomacy had failed twice. J.D. Vance flew to Pakistan for talks. Iran walked out. And the Washington Post estimate, 6 months to clear the mines, is beginning to look optimistic. Governments are quietly preparing. Japan asked refiners to release emergency reserves. The Philippines is rationing. The Atlantic Council published a warning: prepare citizens for physical oil rationing. Not a suggestion, a warning. The preparation is already happening. Most people just haven't noticed yet. And by day 90, one question remained.
Remember that word. Mines.
Iran laid them in 33 kilometers of water, then lost track of them. A weapon that costs a few $1,000s each is holding the global economy hostage. It started on February 28th, with missiles, with ships on fire, with insurance companies going quiet. But what's keeping the strait closed today isn't missiles. It isn't navies. It's something sitting invisibly on the ocean floor. Something no one can fully map. Something that could take 6 months to remove. And every day it stays there. Fertilizer doesn't reach farms. Gas doesn't reach kitchens. Groceries get more expensive. For people who have never heard of the Strait of Hormuz, who have never seen it on a map, who just opened a bill and didn't understand why it was higher. The real question isn't when it reopens. The real question is, what does the world look like if it doesn't? If this changed how you see what's happening right now, share it with someone who needs to understand this. And if you want to know what comes after the blockade ends, who wins, and who loses everything, click here.